So this is variables encoding, and it's a short webinar, which we call a mash bite. Now, variables can be tricky when we come across them in the computing curriculum, because the word variables, it has various meanings. Variables in science, we've got variables in maths, and now variables in computing. So in maths, when we talk about variables, it's representing a number that we don't yet know. X plus 2 is 5, for example. In science, if we change the amount of sunlight, what happens to the size of the leaves? And here we've got a dependent and an independent factor, which can influence that the size of the leaves. In computing, though, in particular, when we're talking about computer programming, a variable is a way that we use to store a value or some information that can be used and changed throughout the program. Imagine it being like a box or a storage space where we can put a value and retrieve it or change it later on. Variables are stored in computer memory, which is RAM chips that look like this, and locations in memory have addresses. And you can think of memory locations as being like a row of houses or a row of boxes, storing people, things and families and all sorts of information in them. So how do we know how does the computer know whereabouts in here to actually find your information? Well, we use, just like a row of houses, and addresses, we often use nicknames, or to use the computing term, abstraction, to refer to lots of addresses. So for example, the address 778 Buxton Road, Chadderley, Derbyshire, DE 99 7FG could very well be somebody's address, and to them they will call it home. So when they're referring to that, they wouldn't say let's go to 778 Buxton Road, they'd say let's go home. So they have kind of a nickname for this address or this location, and that's an important thing that we need to get an idea of before we do use it in computing. The other thing that I'm going to show you today is about numbers, strings and functions. And this is all to do with the type of information that we're going to store. We should be telling the computer, not the computing, the type of information that we're going to store. And then the program will know how to handle that information, which we'll come on to in a moment or two. And then there's some things called special variables now, which I'll try and squeeze in at the end. Right, I'm going to go into Purple Mash now. And in here, I wanted to just begin by looking at an example of something that crops up where variables are first introduced in the Year 4 curriculum. And they're introduced in an activity called Day and Night. Oh, hang on, I've got something different going on here, haven't I? And the variables are used in Day and Night to just to store a number in them. And what I've got here is basically a very simple version of an activity that's called Genie in 2Code. But within here, all I want to do is to keep count of how many times we click on this lamp here. I don't want to change its image. So we bring the image, as always, we bring the design to life by using code. So in my code window here, if I want to use a variable to keep count, I've got to create a variable to start with. I've got to tell the computer that I want it to use its working memory. So I drag in the block here, create a variable, and straight away the computer's saying, OK, what kind of information? So I click on the variable type, and here I've got these three types. I've got number, string, and clone. Now, I'm only going to look at number and string today. And a number is just what it says. We're going to store a number. A string, I'll show you an example of in a moment. But let's create a number here. And this is the nickname of it. So this is, rather than putting in the actual address in the computer, which is a whole load of numbers, and can look a little bit like gobbledygook, to be honest. We're going to give it a friendly name, a nickname. So our storage space in those memory chips is called counter. That's our nickname for it. And to begin with, I'm just going to put a 0 in there. So when I click run now, not much seems to happen, but this is a valuable tool you can click in the lower left of the window here. The little purple block, if I click the arrows here to expand it, it opens this window, which is called Variable Watch. And at the top, it's telling me that all the values of things that can change in here. There are things with the lamp that can change its X and Y coordinates and so on, but I'm not worrying about properties in this webinar. So we got at the top here, it says that counter equals 0. So that's great. It's showing us and confirming that we've created this place in the computer's memory called counter, and it's got a 0 in it. So the next thing that I might want to do is to change that counter. Because I've created the storage space and I've put something in there. How do I change it? Well, down here in the orange blocks, I've got another block called change variable. And in here, when I drag it in, it's saying which variable do you want to change. So I'll click onto here. I've only got one variable to choose from. So I'm going to say counter. And now, because it's a number type, the program is recognizing that it can do some maths with it. And it's saying, OK, what do you want to do? You can either change the number to something else, which is set to, you can add to it, subtract, or multiply with it. So in this case, I want to add to it. And I'm just going to say here, add 1. And I'm going to pop that into an event so that I'm just going to say when I click on the lamp, I'm going to add 1 onto the counter. So when I click run now, I've got my lamp here. When I click it, every time you can see the value here in the storage in the memory where we're storing the information, it changes. Click the lamp. And I'm adding 1 on to what's in that storage space. So it's quite interesting and important to understand this, that when we're creating a variable, we set it to an initial value, but then later on we can change that value. And we can say things like later on, if the counter equals 3, then we can change the lamp into a genie and so on. So we can check what a variable is, have a look at what's in that storage space, and then have another command run after that, doing an if. I'll show you quickly how we could do that. Actually, there's no harm in that. So I'll just drag an if block in here, and we're going to say here, if the counter, so straight away I could just click on counter there, and let's say equals 3. Then what do we want to do? We're going to change the lamps, and we'll change the lamp, click on the question mark there to access its properties, and I want to change its image, and I'll make that a genie here. So what happens now is when I click on run, we've initially set the counter variable to 0, and every time I click on the lamp, it's adding 1 on, and it's straight away after it's added 1 on, it's doing a check to see, OK, we've added 1 on, have we got to 3 yet? And if we have got to 3, then we're going to change the image to the genie. So I click it again, and the value of counter is now 2. And this time I'll click it, and it will change to the value of 3 and change into the genie as a result. So this is a good example of how we've used a variable to keep count of something. Now, there's a lot more that I should be telling you about variables, and it's probably a bit too much to fit into 10 minutes. But I'm going to keep going now, even though we should be ending now. But you will get an email with a link to either this video recording or a different video recording that I'll make, and we'll put it on YouTube, and you'll get the full story about variables then. I think trying to squeeze it into 10 minutes is a bit much, actually. The next type of variable that we've got here is one to do with strings. Now, I've probably got a bit too much on the screen here, but what I've done here at the top, actually a top tip that I use with children actually whenever I'm teaching, is I will tell them if there's too much on the screen, then just cover it up with something. So in this case, I'm going to use my word window here that I was doing something in earlier. And I'm just going to use it to uncover one line of code at a time, and then we'll have a look at how it works. So I'm using strings now as variables. So you can see up at the top here, we've got create a variable, and the type is string, which is text. And I'm giving it the nickname question, and I'm just starting it off with none in there. So it's just got a none stored in there. I'm creating another variable, which is, as you can see, a number called year, and that is set to 0. Then I'm going to ask a question. The prompt is, what's your name? Now we have a special variable because I've prompted for an input, there's going to be a box where the user can type in an answer. And because I've used this block here, it makes available something called input. Now, what I want to do is I want to set the question to whatever the person types in for their name, which is called input. And then I'm going to do this fancy thing that comes up in year 5 and 6 called concatenation, where I'm going to add on what year were you born. So if I just delete this one here, let's add that in again. Here, so straight after I've asked what their name is, what I want to do is I want to change a variable. So I'm going to say now that the variable name I want to change is the question. And I'm going to set the value of question. So it's not none anymore. We're going to alter it to, and as soon as I click into this box of what I want to now make, I've got this option of input, and that will be whatever the user's typed in as their name. So if I type in Justin, it will put Justin in here. If somebody else types in Petra, it will put Petra in there where we've got input. And now because I want to say, Justin, what year were you born in? Or Petra, what year were you born in? I click the plus at the end here, which is going to add on even more text after their name. So I'm going to put a comma there, and I'll just type in the question here. So which year were you born? Question mark. So what we're doing here is we're changing the value that's stored in question to whatever the person's typed in here using this special variable called input, and we're then concatenating or joining on a comma and which year were you born. And then where I've put prompt question here, this is the prompt is a pop-up box we'll see in a moment. And I could type something in here, I could type in hello or whatever, but I can also access any variables that I have. So I can pop prompt question, and it's going to pop up a box on the screen with whatever their name is and which year were you born. And then they type in the year that they were born, and that then becomes the new input. And I can then say my year, I'm going to set to whatever they put as the input. And I'm going to do a little bit of calculations with that here in the final box. Just have a quick look at how that works. So if I click to run this now, yes, I've got in the variable what you can see, I've got question is none and year is 0. So if I now type in what's my name and I just put in here Justin, if I can spell it right, that is, and I click OK. What you'll see next is, in fact, can I go into step mode here? What will happen now is if I click OK, it's now flashing to say it wants to change question to what is input plus the year I was born. So I'll click on steps again to allow that to happen. And you see now over here in variable watch, it's saying Justin. So it took my input and it's added on the comma, which year were you born? And now if I click on the steps again, it pops up with the prompt with that question in it, just in which year you were born. So if I imagine that I'm a bit younger than I really am and type in there 1990 and say OK, what's going to happen next is the year is going to be set to the input. So we can see here now that year is 1990. And then the next thing that will happen is we're going to have a pop-up box with an alert, and it's going to say in, and then it's going to cleverly say, know that I've got a number here, and it's going to add 100 onto it. So it'll say in, whatever the year I'll be 100, you will be 100. So if I click the footsteps there, and there we go. In 2090, you will be 100. So we've done quite a lot of clever things there with strings and whatnot. And I don't want you to be sort of overwhelmed by what I've just shown you there, because I've actually wrapped up all of the work that you're likely to cover with your brightest children in year 5 and 6 into one little activity there, showing you everything that's possible with strings and numbers and so on. But hopefully that's a little demo that makes a little bit of sense to you. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show was another type of special variable, because I've got this design here where I've basically got these bananas, and when I click run, all the bananas have been set up with different directions. You can see here in the properties. So some go down and some of them go to the right and some of them go down. And when I click on run, I want to splat the bananas to score points. Now, the interesting thing is that when I splat on any banana, it knows which banana to hide. And how on earth does it know which banana I've clicked on and it's just going to hide that one? Well, that comes up because in the code, there's another special variable which you get access to sometimes. And it's a little bit like the input variable, which is just kind of automatically there. You don't have to create it or change it in the way that I've shown you how to do with the number and string. So from scratch here, what I'd be doing is I'd be saying whenever I click on something, I want something to happen. So let's drag a when clicked event in. The question mark shows all of the different bananas and all the different objects, but there's these two really interesting ones at the bottom. There's one that says any object, which would include the points score, so I could get rid of the scoreboard if I clicked on it. But I've also got one called any banana. And if I click on any banana, then the next thing that I can do is say change a variable. And if I change this variable, one of my options is the clicked banana. So the computer, as part of the when clicked event, it knows which banana I've clicked on, and I can access that by changing the variable and pulling up clicked banana. And then with that clicked banana, I can do any of the things that are available to it. And in this case, I wanted to hide it. So on here, I can click run now. And whenever I click on a banana out of all the multiple bananas on here, which are called great names like object 1 and object 2 and object 3, I can click on them and it knows which one it is, ready to hide it. If I go into design mode, you can see that by clicking onto each banana, they've all got this tag that says object, but they also have another tag that says banana. I could get rid of object tag here so they only say banana. And then over here, when I want to change a variable, I've only got the clicked banana one, which is there because so whatever you've got as tags in design mode will come through here. You can use them in things like click events and so on and get it to hide that way. And if I wanted to change the score here, which is another use of variables, I'm just going to drag the points object in and I'm going to do an add 1. So now every time I run this, my banana will, the right banana will disappear and it will add 1 onto my score at the top there as well. So that's a very, very typical use of variables with children in year 5 and 6. And you'll see this in the lesson plans, and all of the answers are also available to any, if you're going through guided activities, all of the answers are available to it in the solutions folder in 2Code, which is always worth a look. The last thing that I just wanted to show is how when you get, you can use variables for a wide range of things. You can use variables for storing people's names, for storing years, for keeping score. You can use variables for timers, all sorts of things. And in one of the year 6 activities, which we're developing at the moment, called Text Adventures, we use variables, and there's 3 of them in this program here. And they're used to store which room the player's in a text adventure, also to store whether the player has got the key that they need to open a door up. So we can check if they've got the key. If the has key equals true, then we can let them through the door. And if has key is false, then we say, sorry, you need to go and find the key. And we've got another one here for whether they finished or not, so we know whether to end the game. And you can see on the screen here, what I've done with this is I've kept them organized by using tabs, which you can use in Gorilla 2Code. So I have my first tab here is where I've put all the variables and I've created the variables, the storage spaces. I'm going to need. And then in the next tabs, I've got the code that runs how the rooms work. So just keeping variables organized with year 5 and 6 children, if they've got a chance to access these tabs, can just help to make it a bit more readable. And when I'm working with children, I'll often talk about these tabs up here as being like the headings in a piece of non-fiction writing. So the program is a set of instructions for how to play a game. And if you're writing a long set of instructions on paper, you'd probably put some subheadings in there to help it be clearly organized. And this is all that the tabs are doing here, and the variables always go first. Well, I hope that this little ramble about variables has helped you to develop your understanding and given you a little bit more confidence in what can be a little bit of a tricky subject. Thanks ever so much for watching. Goodbye.